Here we go. Welcome back, everybody. We've got a different looking cast of characters up here. At least Harry's in the seat for us. Ryan is traveling this month, so won't be joining us. And so we've got Harry Murray, who you guys have met a few months back, that runs the underwriting specific towards our new construction and fix and flip and transactional funding products. We've got a incredible lineup for today's capital markets webinar for February of 2026. We've got colleagues that we'll introduce here in a few minutes from Stradley Ronan. But before we do that, we were originally going to just dive into our discussion here, but we've got a positive update on interest rates, so we don't have any slides, but we've got a general macro update. So take us out here, Jack.
Yeah, happy to bring a positive headline. But if you saw the Wall Street Journal about 3 hours ago, there's a headline that for the first time in 3 years, since September of 2022, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate has dipped below 6%. So it touched 5.98%. And obviously, this is positive news to the real estate world as a whole. I'm hoping that I think a lot of the market is hoping that this should play into the psychology a bit, where now that people are maybe accepting the fact that mortgage rates probably aren't going to return to 2 to 3% anytime in the near future, that maybe dipping below 6 and then living hopefully in this 5 to 6 range, you should start to see some more activity pick up. So
Awesome.
Positive headline that we're happy to announce.
Awesome. So rates are moving in the right direction for everybody, at least in the real estate space, and should help out with some refinances, affordability, some carry on movement there from the State of the Union that was a long State of the Union. So all right. Well, listen, let me introduce. So we've got two partners from Stradley Ronan on the call here, Caroline Gorman and Joe Nguyen. I will let them introduce themselves, but been huge. I've worked with Joe since 2011, 2010 time period. Significant, been working with him for a long period of time. I couldn't be more excited to have him on the show. And then Caroline, we've been working with at iFundCities here for a while. So they're natives to Philadelphia. But Caroline, why don't you introduce yourself first here?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. My name's Caroline Gorman. I'm chair of the corporate department here at Stradley, a member of the board of directors. I'm based out of our Philadelphia office. My primary focus in my day-to-day practice is on finance and real estate, which is where I get to work with Brian a lot. Personally, I live in Center City with my husband and 4 young children, and just really appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
Awesome. Thank
Hey
you.
everyone, I'm Joe Nguyen. I am a litigation partner here at Stradley Ronan. As Brian said, I worked with him for over a decade now. Previously to this stop, I was in-house counsel at GMAC Mortgage and then also Aquin Financial as well. And before that, I was with another law firm. I've been litigating mortgage-related issues and real estate-related issues pretty much my whole career, right out of law school. So for the last, I don't know, 25 years or so, I've been doing this. And now I have the pleasure and the honor to represent iFunds and have been doing so for a while now. So happy to be with you all, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And you never want to walk into a courtroom with Joe on the other side, or maybe an arbitration room. That's the only, with Joe on the other side. It's been he's a heavy hitter. We're glad he's on our team. So
Thanks.
all right. Well, listen, we've got a diverse set of customers that we work with day in and day out, whether it's larger scale developers that are in the new construction or own a big portfolio of rental properties, all the way down to folks that might be doing it as part time, a couple transactions a year. And so we've got, I think, an incredible opportunity for our customers to learn a lot from Caroline and Joe. And so as we dive in, we're going to help facilitate this with some questions that we have. But folks that are dialing in, ask questions. This is an incredible opportunity. Two big heavy hitters in the real estate world from two different lenses on transactional side all the way through litigation. And so a ton of industry perspective, trying to ask some good questions. So with that, I don't know, one of you guys want to kick this off over to Caroline?
Yeah. So I guess starting at the top, just with deal structuring. So Caroline, in your experience, what is some of the items you most often help borrowers and lenders with, or where do you see maybe borrowers and lenders lacking, where they should probably be hiring an attorney to help with some of the deal structuring stuff?
Yeah. So in terms of deal structure, some of the things that I find the parties don't always understand is whether a loan is non-recourse or full recourse. People think that you get a mortgage loan, if it goes underwater, you just give it back. You give it the building back to the lender, and you can walk away. That's not always the case for a lot of businesses. If there's been any fraud, or the lender can show waste. It's not just giving back the building or the property. The lender can go after your business assets, personal assets. It becomes full recourse before you realize it. Another area where I think people don't necessarily pay attention or understand is with respect to prepayment or yield maintenance, which is the idea of, you're focused on the interest rate and what you would be paying. But if you end up paying off the loan, or, you have a chance to flip the property and sell it, a lot of loans, a lot of transactions involve a structure where you would be responsible for like the lost interest rate for the lender. That's a yield maintenance fee. Um, Lastly, I think borrowers sometimes don't really focus on the covenants. They're focused on the financial covenants, if there's a debt service coverage or a leverage ratio or anything like that, but don't focus on kind of the basics of the documentation, and need to be, paying close attention to that when they're structuring the deal and documenting the transaction.
And Caroline, do you have any specific covenants or loan documents in general that people should be most focused on as far as a borrower?
So I would say all of them, but
Right.
really, so pay attention to the financial covenants. That's where the bread and butter is, because um, uh, you know that's your financial performance and what the lender is going to be focused on. But if things are starting to go south, a lot of times borrowers aren't focused on the fact that, was the loan properly authorized? Are you in good standing? Do you have all your licenses? Are you in material compliance? So a lot of times what we um, see, like when we're representing a borrower side, or what we see coming from borrowers counsel, is the focus on building in flexibility, and that's what borrowers should be focused on in their own documents. Um, because it could be a total event of default if you just are, forgot to file something and you're no longer in good standing. It's something that could be easily corrected, but if you don't have that wiggle room in your documents, the lender can call the loan, and you can find yourself in deep trouble. um, One of the other things that I think is so important is the corporate structure. A lot of borrowers focus on kind of the big picture of the deal and aren't focused on kind of the corporate documentation. A lot of these loans are with single purpose entities, SPEs, and you can pull documentation off the internet to do the operating agreements and everything like that. But the documentation is more, you should be more focused on that, because it can get complicated, and not just focus on the documentation but actually follow what it says. So if you're dealing with limited partners or general partners, like making sure that you're focused on who has the authority to do what. When everything's good, people are like, yeah, whatever you think, whatever you think. But if it hasn't been properly authorized and documented, that'll come back to bite you on the back end.
Absolutely.
So that's like so for borrowers, like that's the operating agreement of
Right.
the entity. And so making sure that you've got sound documentation for all the parties within that operating agreement. What are some of so if that operating agreement, um, if it is an SPE, do you- what are some of the ways that folks do they have like resolutions that dictate some of that authority at a more granular level? Do they build it directly into the operating agreement? What are some ways that you see folks get a little bit more specific in the operating agreement around who's responsible for what?
Yeah, Brian, it kind of runs the gamut. So we see operating agreements that are like 2 pages long and are just like the bare bones, right? What I think is better for borrowers is when there's kind of it doesn't need to be every tiny detail, but kind of the bifurcation of major decisions and kind of day-to-day operations. The day-to-day operations, you don't want to hamstring the parties trying to get things done on a daily basis such that they can't make any decisions without everyone coming to the table and signing a resolution. But major decisions, including like loan terms and revising documentation, authority, that's when you want to make sure that the parties are all in agreement. And from like a lender's counsel perspective, we often try to make sure that there's a resolution that dictates that it states very clearly the parties understand the collateral that's being pledged. They understand what the loan amount is, what the loan documents say, and that resolution. Even if your operating agreement says that that decision can be made by one person, we make sure the resolution lines that up, and who's authorized to sign loan documents. So the resolutions kind of work as a add-on to the operating agreement. Great operating agreements kind of dictate who has the authority, but resolutions will be specific to a deal and explain who has the authority and who has approved the loan terms, who has authority to sign, that sort of thing.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah. And I think this all rings true to us as a lender too, right? When we see maybe an operating agreement that's a little unclear on who has control and looks a little hairy, I think it raises a red flag for us. And I think as if you're a borrower and you have a clean operating agreement with clearly defined structure, that's only gonna increase the your ability to find lenders that can offer you quick speed to close. And Harry, I'm sure you can speak to this, right? What happens when you see a complex operating agreement coming through the pipeline?
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially you guys mentioned the SPEs, for investors out there for different projects to have different operating agreements for different complexities of the project. A typical renovation project probably isn't going to hold the same complexity as a larger new construction build where there's capital being raised for equity. And so I think what we see a lot of, especially in like the LP GP space or a bigger complex project, is you have three people that are three major roles in the project, being your builder, your capital, and your project manager, operator, somebody that's going to kind of quarterback the project. And any which way of those, they might own a certain piece of a percentage of that operating agreement. But in the operating agreement, it might be dictated that only, all three people have unanimous consent as far as selling that project or making some of the big decisions, especially when dispositioning, when you only have maybe one of the guys, the operator, actually personally guaranteeing your loan. So I think it's really important to break out each role and the powers for each person. And then naturally, as a lender, we're going to want the right person or all of those guys to be on our loan. As far as a personal guarantee goes, I think you see a lot of times towards the end, everybody's a great partner until something goes off the rails, and then they're not so much a great partner, and there can be some friction on the back end.
Yeah, a lot of times, Harry, what we see, and I'm sure you guys see this too, when we're reviewing documents, like in the diligence stage, it's interesting when you get all these nice organizational documents that kind of dictate who's in what lane, and then you also get material contracts that have been signed by someone completely different that doesn't have authority, and
Right.
it's like, well, that guy approved it, we're fine, and there's not the actual following of the organizational documents. It's really important that you can suss out with your borrower whether they understand what their own documents say, and then making sure that each of those roles, while defined in the documentation, are also being followed like in real life. That everyone's kind of staying in their lane and doing the role that they have been assigned and are
Right.
responsible for, because that will keep it cleaner on the, if things start going south.
Awesome. And so as you move into and you're looking at a transaction, you're advising a client on a transaction itself. What are some of the um, key clauses that lenders or borrowers should look at, that protect protect them from from their standpoint?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we talked about recourse, but what are
Mhm.
some of the things they should be focused on?
Yeah, so I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the recourse is super important, especially with the personal guarantees, because it could trigger, like for individuals that have the, we call them the bad boy carve out. So, um, they think nothing's going to go wrong and everything's great and there won't be fraud or waste or, misappropriation. But if there is, the lender can go after the individual personally. That's your home, your like personal life. So pay attention to that. And then from a borrower perspective, making sure that you have the flexibility in the covenants and the events of default for notice and cure periods. Because, you know, you have the best of intentions, everything's on the up and up. But making sure that you have the opportunity to say, oh, I didn't realize I had to file that one document that would keep us in existence. I can do it right now. It'll be cured within, a day. Nothing's bad with the loan. But if you don't have those kind of um, that wiggle room in the documentation, you can find yourself in hot water pretty quickly. Also with like kind of the materiality and the knowledge qualifiers, like who's responsible in the borrower entity for making sure that someone's paying attention to what the obligations under the loan documents are. I'm sure everyone who owns a home has signed their mortgage documents without even paying attention to what they say, like what you're obligated to do, what you're obligated to like notify the bank on. And it's never a problem until it is a problem and you go back and say, oh, I had no idea that I was supposed to be doing that. It's the same with this, but on like a much bigger scale. So it's really important that someone is identified as the person who's going to be responsible for making sure that the entity is performing under the loan and performing under the loan documents. That's how you avoid kind of those foot faults or the minor issues that become big issues when the financially the loan isn't performing.
Got it. That's helpful. That's helpful. And so when one of the things as we were pulling some of the questions together, that came up kind of internally, like when we think about documentation, what type of documentation? So 2021 low interest rate environment. You flip to 2023, the market moves pretty substantially. So the market shifted, largely interest rate driven. What are some of the like documentation or things you've learned that could have been done better when these deals were being structured in 2021 or 2022, that now the market's changed, largely interest rate driven? Any changes in documentations or any best practices or any lessons learned for things like market shifts?
Yeah, so I think again, going back to kind of making sure that the organizational documents are really followed, that the parties that need to be making the decisions for entering into these transactions and following these loans is really important. Another thing is, you know, sometimes, and again, it's not by design that they're poorly done, but a lot of times, you have these SPEs that don't have great financials, like it's just not really well thought out. Some holes there. The best borrowers are the ones that have like really clean financials that are easy to follow. There's not really holes there. I think it's also important to kind of have an understanding of, from a lender perspective, of the customer, and from a borrower perspective of your partners, in terms of like litigation history, and making sure that you understand, like, the SPE itself is probably a newly formed entity. There's not a lot of history there. There won't be judgments against it, ideally. But you got to think about like projects have they done in the past? What is there existing litigation or claims that these folks are dealing with that you should be focused on as well, because it could be indicative of a pattern, or it could be impactful for the just the wherewithal of the borrower.
Got it. This reminds me of a few months ago we had a gentleman on, Sean Pincus from Grit Construction, and he talked about partners and having alignment towards understanding what their goals are, their future goals. Where he's got partnerships where somebody might be 65 years old or 70 years old, and they're looking to just get out of like they're looking to monetize a transaction. Market shifted. He'd like to hold on to the property. Partner wants out, and so for everybody that's out there, I think it's important to understand the financial goals of your business partners, so that as things change in the future, that there's strong stronger alignment financially, to be able to weather those market shifts and those storms. And then
Yeah, I
obviously
think
Caroline said it a few times, that organization having strong, we hear that a lot on the underwriting. Yep. in what Harry looks at each and every day. The folks that spend the time in keeping their books organized, keeping their documentation organized, tend to have easier underwriting experiences, and it helps. Probably good, like corporate or business hygiene is to keep those things organized. So good color there.
Brian, that's a great
Caroline.
point too, because just to piggyback on that, the all of that stuff and understanding what the goal of your partners is, what the exit strategy is, it's easier when you get to that point. If all of the other stuff is clean, if you've had a good relationship with your lender, it's not in default. The lender's capital partners are going to have an easier time approving whatever you're asking for. If it's a change of control, or one partner's exiting, it's much harder if things have not been going well or haven't been smoothly documented for the lender to approve that. So it benefits everything from start to finish if you kind of start from a place of organization and like clean books.
Awesome. Well, let's bring in Joe. This is a good segue, I think, over at this
He's
point.
had such
This is
a hard
spot where
time
we
not
hope
talking this whole time.
everybody doesn't want to land, is in this side. But when things get to this point, it's good to have a purview. It's good to be able to, you get to a spot where something can't be resolved. We want to hear, Joe, you've heard us talk a lot about what we could do up front. Now take us through the backdrop of this a little bit, and see what you're seeing out there as it relates to litigation. What are some of the types of disputes that you're seeing most right now?
Yeah, well, you're right. Unfortunately, by the time you get to me, things have gone a little south. But I'll tell you, so both Caroline and I are not just lawyers, but we're also investors. And so I echo everything Caroline has said. Whenever I get an operating agreement, for instance, or whatever, I get any kind of documents, I shoot them over to her, and so she'll take a look at them for me as well. And sometimes Caroline and I will explore kind of some opportunities amongst ourselves. So I can tell you with certainty that it's quite important to know who your partner is. I don't really trust her all the time, and so it's important that you get along and that you're all aligned. But I'm kidding. So once you get to me, or once you get to a litigator, right, there are things that obviously have gone south, and so it's always good to have confidence in the documents that you've already had when you work with someone like Carolyn. But sometimes it's unavoidable, and we're seeing a lot of litigation, particularly in this market and in this environment where the days of cap rate compression is over, right? Cap rates are going up, or at least they're stabilizing at higher levels. And so you're seeing a lot of litigation, and kind of in three areas, right? You're seeing litigation in pretty much in every relationship of these deals, whether it's the GP versus the LP, for instance, whether it's borrower versus lender, or whether it's seller versus buyer. And the first group of the three we're seeing a lot, right? Because there's this debt overhang, right? There's these, the battle of who's going to take the haircut as between the GPs and the LP. And what you're seeing is, LPs are suing GPs for like breach of fiduciary duty, for instance, and then GPs countersuing or counterclaiming to enforce capital calls. Because again, the game at this point between those two groups is, well, who's going to take the loss, right? Who's going to take this haircut? How do we spread the hurt? So we're seeing a lot of that. LPs are alleging that GPs, they breached their fiduciary duty, for instance, they over leveraged the assets or failed to execute the business plan, and the GPs are saying, well, fine, we'll enforce a capital call, for instance, right? And so, that's how they're kind of spreading around the losses here, particularly when the debt and the equity exceeds the value of the property, right? So now we're trying to figure out, well, who's gonna take that hit. The other thing that we're seeing where there's like there's unexpected expense. For instance, a roof needs to be replaced that we didn't anticipate before, or we need to refinance, and so we have to pay down the debt, right? Where's this money coming from? And so again, the same kind of arguments. GPs are doing a capital call, and the LPs are saying, no, you messed this up, GP. You breached your duties, and so the suit is back and forth. And then when there is a capital call, the LPs are arguing that you're unfairly diluting my ownership, or the capital call, the dilution is inappropriately punitive as opposed to compensatory. So you're seeing a lot of that static as between the GPs and the LPs. And again, that's all when the property is underwater, or there's monies that need to be kind of brought to the deal, additional monies that need to be brought to the deal. And now we're fighting over who brings that. So that's one area. Another area is, and you, Brian, you gave the example earlier, where look, the property is underwater, the deal is underwater, right? And an LP might, for instance, or a GP might, for instance, want to do like a strategic default. Let's just give the property back. Let's give the collateral back to the lender, and let's just take a tax loss on it. And the other side, they refuse to do so, for instance. And again, that's more static between the partners. And so, if the GT wants to negotiate a short sale, for instance, the LP wants to sue the lender, right? So there are different kind of approaches, and there's disagreement as to these approaches. And so you're seeing a lot of that as well. So that's kind of on the GP LP side.
Yeah, Joe, real
You're
quick.
also seeing a lot of litigation between the borrowers and the lenders, unfortunately. And so, there's disagreement, for instance, as to technical defaults versus actual defaults. So like a technical default might be a loan to value covenant, for instance, right? And so, the lender may value it one way, and then, the investors may value it another way. And then you'll see kind of lawsuits over the appraisal process, what they're using, et cetera. So you're seeing some of that as well. And then you're also seeing kind of affirmative or defensive lawsuits. So before a foreclosure happens, for instance, a borrower might go out there and they might sue the lender, saying that the lender didn't hold up their side, or the lender was too difficult in kind of extending the loans, or providing more capital, or more extending the default, for instance. And so you see some of that as well. And then the third thing that you see is litigation between the sellers and the buyers. And you're seeing, particularly for the rehab and flip crowd, you're seeing, the buyers suing the builders or the sellers, saying, you materially hid kind of defects from me, et cetera. So those are kind of the litigations that we're seeing right now.
Got it. Joe, on the GPLP stuff, when when there's that static and sort of that back and forth, is that something where like clear documentation would have prevented it from happening? Or if like if the structure is unclear, does one party have an advantage over another? And that's
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, the cleaner the documents are, the easier to resolve the dispute, right? And it's if you don't have on the front end clear documents and clear terms, then anyone can kind of pick and choose what they want to fight about. And so to prevent the litigation, or at least prevent the swords that people might yield in these disputes, you want to make sure that you get Carolyn involved, or lawyers involved at the front end to make sure the terms are clear. But yeah, for sure, I think when I was looking at this online, I think they said something to like someone on the internet, and take it for what it's worth, said about 60 to 70% of lawsuits relate in this space are the result of vague or unclear terms, right? And so that's a big part of it, because you're never going to avoid lawsuits generally, like altogether. But if 60 to 70% of the time the basis for the lawsuit are vague terms, these are unforced errors, right? Carolyn called it a foot fault before. You can avoid those kinds of disputes at the front end. And so you're exactly right. Having the clear documents are quite important. For instance, let me give you an example. So, performance milestones. Sometimes those are vague terms in there, right? Commercially reasonable efforts. Those are oftentimes kind of vague, or like, a standard of care that's vague. All those things leave wiggle room for people to fight over and people to use against each other. And so it's quite important to make sure that the agreements are clear enough to avoid those pitfalls.
Wow, that's helpful. 60 to 70%. And then
Yeah, it's not insane.
in those instances where, stuff does go south and both sides do get in a fight, is it does one side typically have an advantage if documentation's unclear between the GP and LP, or are both sides going to lose from time, money, energy?
Well, in terms of the merits of it, right? It's going to depend on how the contract's written, right, or how the documents are drafted. And so it's kind of hard to say whether typically the GP has the better position, or the LP. It just, again, depends on the documentation itself. But aside from that, look, everyone's going to feel the hurt once it's litigation, right? So the litigation costs can be astronomical, and sometimes people, they underestimate litigation. They do two things. They overestimate the ease at which disputes are resolved through litigation. Litigation is tough. Litigation is, it's drawn out, it's taxing. And they also underestimate the costs and the time of litigation. So what do I mean by that? So litigation, even if it's like a $20,000 dispute, $50,000 dispute, you may be spending $100,000 to resolve this thing. And that's because there's a lack of understanding of the litigation process and how much time and effort is involved. But also, in addition to costs, litigation is taxing on the parties themselves, right? There's the time and effort that a party is spending focusing on litigation, as opposed to doing other things, doing other deals, as opposed to putting that litigation spend to make money in other places. And so that's a big component of what people fail to understand or fail to appreciate with respect to litigation, right? Because look, you're going to have to sit through depositions. You're going to have to sit through, court hearings. You're going to have to be on the phone with a knucklehead like me all the time, right? And so you don't want to spend time with me. You want to spend time with your partners trying to make money, as opposed to paying money to spend time with me and me bringing, bad news to you, for instance. So the emotional kind of toll that litigation takes on people quite underestimate that.
And Joe, just a quick question here on the circling back to the technical defaults. So looking at that through like an underwriting lens, you have essentially the property values are decreasing at a rate faster than where you're paying down the balance. So are you seeing that from an upfront that's more of a market decrease, or are we seeing bad appraisals, bad maybe inflated values on the front end that we could protect ourselves on? Any color there?
Yeah, I think it's both, unfortunately, right? So, the market is going to dictate a lot of this as well. Cap rates, as I said before, they're stabilizing, they're going up, and values are going down. For instance, sometimes we only have enough money to pay the interest, right? And we know that we're never going to have enough to pay the principal, right? And so that's oftentimes a catalyst to litigation or static between the partners, because that's more of a market thing, right? That's a market factor that creates kind of these disputes. And so you see that as well. And then you also see on the paperwork side, when it's interesting how clever people can be when they want to try to get out of something, right? So they'll look for any kind of sword or dagger that they can find, just to try to get out of it. And unfortunately, those arrows, those swords, daggers, they're found in the documentation themselves. So that's that's why it's always best to protect not only yourself, but the investment in the deal itself in terms of on the front end before you get to litigation.
Great.
Yeah, what we see, and I don't know if we have an answer to this problem, but what we see as a lender is we see you've got a GP, an LP, and a lender involved, and you have three parties, and the LP's investment has been the opportunity to earn that capital back. Generate a yield is probably gone, or the ability to recover some of that principal has been, is the recovery probability is pretty low. Is then the contention of against the GP saying, well, we're just going to hold up any sale of the property, any foreclosure, any faster remediation to preserve the value, and and you've got the lender that's still clipping a high interest rate transitional loan, and it just kills the project. And so I don't know that there's any, but that tension point between those three parties really hurts hurts the GP, it hurts the lender, it hurts the property value. It creates this snowballing effect. And so I think that probably some of that stuff probably goes back to the documentation up front, is to have the power of the GP to make the right decision to preserve the value of the underlying property. Those are things we look at. I don't know if you guys have any context, Joe or Caroline, about that, but that constant battle we see when you need a capital call, when you haven't, your interest has run out, project's taking a little bit longer, needs a little bit more money. That's an ongoing pain point that presents itself.
Brian, I've seen, and you don't want to get into kind of lender liability type issues and be making calls on behalf of the borrower. But sometimes if you have the right kind of triggers within the document that the borrower has to come and deal with you as the lender, it brings everyone to the table faster than if the project's totally, in the trash. If you come to the table faster and kind of, you can renegotiate some of those financial covenants or see if there's movement with some capital calls or whatever, it brings everyone to the table faster than maybe the GP and LP would have otherwise wanted to, but it protects everyone else in the long run. So having those triggers within the document that require that conversation is what we kind of guide our lender clients, and knowing that it'll help the borrower in the long run usually.
Awesome.
Yeah. Joe, talk to us about the seller versus buyer conflicts you've been seeing.
Yeah, so you're seeing some like warranty claims, right? And this comes in the context of some of your customers or clients who are kind of the rehab and flip guys, right? And so you saw this a lot kind of immediately after the pandemic, where they are not everyone's a great rehab, not everyone's a great contractor, right? And so they'll do things like they'll try to hide foundational cracks with like drywall or vinyl or something like that, right? And so you're seeing borrowers who now, they bought something and then, they have buyer's remorse, and so now they're trying to get at whoever they can get at. The problem that one of the problems that your customers or the investors and borrowers on this call should realize is that consumer protection laws are very, very strong, right? And so, and it can be very aggressive. And, a lot of these consumer protection laws will provide for treble damages. So there was a case that I was reading about not so long ago in Florida, where this is where the example of the cracks in the foundation came up. So they sold the builder or the contractor sold the property for $300,000, right? And the borrower sued them, saying, "Look, you did shoddy work on this, and not only did you do shoddy work on it, you failed to tell me about it." And so the court found that not only was it like negligent, but it was fraudulent, right? By failing to disclose these things. And so even though the sale price was $300,000, the builder was on the hook for $450,000 after it's all said and done. And that doesn't even account for the amount of spend that they had to put into litigation. So that's, these warranty claims is something that's happening post pandemic, because you saw a lot of people, trying to rehab and trying to flip these properties. The other kind of related point on that is it's some call it the permit trap, right? When investors are failing to get permits, right? They're doing the shortcut. They're just not going out and getting the permits done. That is almost like a silver bullet for these consumers, for these buyers. When you don't spend the extra short amount of time to get a permit, right? Later on, if there's a dispute over the workmanship or the quality, failing to have a permit is almost saying, hey, you got me. It's almost a gotcha. And so it's those little things like that where, again, when people are on the cusp of losing money, they're going to try to find anything they can do to kind of get out of it. And so those are the kinds of arguments you're seeing that these consumers are making.
Got it. So when we ask for permits, you get the permits,
Yeah.
even if it's a small rehab. Is anything else when you, because I think this is a key component to this, because we do a lot of business with folks that are renovating homes and also doing new construction. And I know you're relying on subcontractors. You have to have the right oversight there. And so if you're not in that market, you've got good controls in place for that subcontractor or general contractor. Anything else you would see that our borrowers, the folks doing the renovation, they want to do the things right? Is there any checks and balances or any best practices that either of you guys see that they could do to protect themselves when they sell it, besides permits?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's built into kind of the warranties themselves, right? So like if you're the work that you do, don't just list that, in the disclosures, et cetera, we redid the plumbing or whatever, right? Detail exactly the things that you did, right? So, the materials that I know it sounds kind of overkill, but that's kind of my job to advise folks to do this, to protect themselves on the back end. Detail every little thing you did, right? And so, when the buyer says that, there's faulty whatever, you can say, hey, look, I showed you exactly what I did, right? And you agreed to it when you purchased it. So that's one of the things that I think is important and often overlooked, because builders and your borrowers, they have better things to do than kind of itemize every little thing that they've done to a rehab. But it really helps in the end to defend these kinds of cases.
Interesting. Okay, so listing out, here's the 30 things that we did to rehab this property, so that it's here's a defined area of what we did and how we did it. Helps out on the back end.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it will the little bit of pain that it takes to do that now will save you a bunch of liability or a bunch of exposure later.
It also helps from an underwriting perspective because you know what someone's actually doing to the property, what's that after repair value going to be, or if they want to come in for a 3-month DSCR loan and cash out, like we want to know exactly what they did so we can substantiate that value. So it's a great point.
Again, it's like the more detailed, the better.
Yeah.
Like if you come with a super detailed budget of exactly what you're going to do, and these are the materials and the process, you're going to have a lot of lenders that want to work with you. But if it's, I'm just going to build a house,
right?
Then it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to establish the trust there.
Yeah, I think one theme, if there's one takeaway, it would be clear documentation, like across the board from start to finish, because it helps at every stage.
Yeah. I guess another takeaway though would be, look, again, this is a skeptic of me, but everyone is trying to position themselves. Well, once things go south, right? Everyone's positioning themselves for litigation and a fight, and so just know that the sooner you get lawyers involved, right, the sooner they can prepare you and position you for that fight. For instance, don't just go out and send demand letters. Don't just go out and try to fix things yourself before you bring in someone who can look at it and tell you, here are the pitfalls. Here is where you are going to be, the arguments you're going to make, and here are the arguments that they're going to make. And so you can then kind of figure out, even before litigation, the value of litigation, for instance, or the value of the dispute. And so it will give you an idea to kind of determine your strategy, whether it's full-blown litigation, whether it's some kind of workout or resolution amongst the different parties. And so people always hire me after the litigation's been filed, for instance, but I'm telling you, you get more bang for your buck when you hire either Carolyn or even a litigator before you get to that point, even if it's even if it's after the deal has already been signed.
All right, Caroline, so we like to think about how the market's doing in general. What's been changing? How would you best characterize the market today versus maybe a year or two ago? Any trends? Anything you would?
Well, I think a year or two ago, everyone was kind of in a holding pattern, not sure what was going to happen with interest rates, not sure, the political climate, everything. Now I feel like capital has loosened up a bit. People are doing more deals. People aren't holding their breath as much. You dealt with tariffs a couple months ago and no one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to move. The whole, it seems like people have gotten more comfortable with the uncomfortable and not necessarily knowing exactly what was going to happen. So I feel like, more deals are getting done than they were a year or two ago. So I think it's an exciting time to be on either side.
Awesome. I like to hear that. It's stalling out. It felt like being
deals
out
are getting done
in the field for the last in the a couple months ago. There was a lot of pain from 2024 and 2025, and so seems to be a common theme that 2026 is going to be slightly more productive than more active than the last year. Good.
Should we try to open it up?
Yeah, let's see if we've got any questions here for the team. I don't know where to look. Here we go. Let's see. Let's open it up to some questions.
All right.
What is the minimum percentage ownership for a member manager to have a PG on a loan?
So I think I could take that one, and this kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier in the topic. But as far as what percentage of the ownership in the operating agreement is going to be required to personally guarantee our loan, and I think when we look at it, like we said, from a DSCR, we're looking at 20% ownership versus, because that's going to be a permanent 30-year project or product, versus your RTL side, construction side, where we're going to have look to who actually has the power and actually who can make the actual decisions to sell properties, refinance them, etc.
Awesome. Is there a limit is there any limit to the number of parent companies or SPEs? Question.
Yeah, I know we try, like, we'd like to see no more than like 3 layers of entities. It just goes back to, the more complex an operating structure gets, the harder it is to see who really has control, and then, there is somewhat of a risk that a lender will apply to that structure. So we like to see, I think, no more than three layers.
But it ultimately, I think, comes down to,
Yeah.
Who's going to be, we've harped on it enough, but who's going to have control.
Yep.
Got it. I've got another question here for you, Joe. You've got the temperature. You've got a GPLP relationship where the temperature's heating up a little bit. When do you want to engage with counsel?
I guess the general answer is as soon as possible. Like you can tell when things are starting to go south, right? Obviously, default is the most obvious situation, but when things start to get quiet, when people start to ask for extensions on very simple little things, right? You can tell that well, you should just assume, right? Again, it's a skeptic of me, but you should just assume that people are now starting to position themselves for a fight, right? And so, at that moment, if you assume that the other side, again, skeptical of a position or pessimistic view of it, you need to protect yourself. You need to get a lawyer involved at that moment because they can do things like they can paper things for you, right? For the dispute, they can counsel you as to what to say, what not to say. They can counsel you as things that what to do and what not to do to avoid kind of prejudicing yourself. So, like for instance, we live in a world where we're texting all the time, right? Or we would tell you, hey, a phone call is so much better than a text message because that text message might become an exhibit, for instance, in a lawsuit, or it might be deemed an admission or whatever. And so, if you have someone counseling you to avoid these pitfalls, right? That's what you need, but you need it as soon as possible. So, at the first sign of kind of things going sideways or south, right, you should start talking to a lawyer. And look, it's much more expensive to hire me to fight a litigation or a lawsuit for you than it is to have a 1 hour conversation with Carolyn, for instance, right? And, to talk about, hey, here are the things that you need to you need to think through, and here are the things that you should try to avoid in kind of positioning yourself for a fight.
Helpful. So sooner the better. As soon as the temperature starts to get above, maybe 70 degrees, you gotta bring somebody on board to help you manage through that situation. That's been our experience as well. It seems like it's helpful.
Yeah, and just to underscore that point, Brian, it's a fraction of the cost to bring that person in ahead of time, right? Like it really, like I said before, the example, like if the dispute's over $50,000, it's going to cost you more than $100,000 to resolve that dispute, win or lose, right?
Right.
But if you just bring in, a lawyer to have a 1 hour phone call, 2 hour phone call, that's going to cost you a grand or two to kind of talk it through and maybe even avoid that $100,000 hit. I'm just throwing numbers out there, but that's the kind of the difference in the or the example of the cost savings when you bring in a lawyer early.
Hell yeah, good point. Well, that's it as far as questions that we've got from the audience out there. We couldn't be more thankful to have Joe, Caroline on the call here. It's been a pleasure working with you guys. We appreciate it. It's been incredibly valuable for our borrowers that are out there. Hopefully, everybody felt like similar. A lot of good insights. Incredibly beneficial. We will pick this up in the month of March. We're going to dive back into interest rates. We've got another guest coming on in March. Hopefully, we'll have a lot to talk about with interest rates maybe remaining in that 5% world, and the market's heating up going into an aggressive March selling season.
Yeah.
So, Joe and Caroline, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity,
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.